Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of the Max Rounds 30 podcast, where there is no overtime, and you're watching part 2 of 2 for this week. We actually were originally planning on Keto groups, but we decided that that'll be next week.
Well, because the thing is, we didn't think Liquid was going to win today. I mean, at least I didn't, and I didn't think Cole was going to win today. So
Haters.
It's like everything has changed.
All right. Well, I'm joined as usual by MNMCS here, Jeff, and I've got Dat Paladin or Annie over there on my far right. If you're listening, you have no idea what the directions are, but that's fine. And I'm Jacob Halfman. We're going to be covering everything in 30 minutes. The timer starts now, and what we're going to do is start off with some beautiful is not the right word to use with that. Let me start that over. We're going to start off with some drama that happened in the Twitter sphere over the course of this last week with a certain Luís Mira. Thorin's involved, and of course our main character HexT, which, if you really look at the overall situation, not the main character of this.
The main character is secretly EG, the main character of every episode of Max Rounds 30.
Yeah, we have a fixation at this point.
The anti-hero of
and so who wants to do like the dry what happened kind of. Does heavy sits the crown on my head?
Yeah, I'm gonna go ahead and drop this one on you. You seem like you've got the most comprehensive play-by-play here.
So correct me if I'm wrong here, but here's my remembrance of events that happened 24 hours ago. So Luís Mira puts out an article in Deserto. For those who don't know, Luís Mira was a former journalist at HLTV, incredibly well respected, probably one of the best journalists we have in the space. And so he puts out this article, exclusive EG player found to have used slurs in the past. And this is sort of something that's like a very like social justice topic when you find like a player's like old tweets. Like it's a classic, beat journalist thing you do when someone does something controversial in their past. But the immediate issue people had with this article is it's about HexT. He plays for Evil Geniuses. And the stuff Luís Mira posted were archives of tweets HexT made when he was around 13 to 15. Use of the N-word, use of, homophobic slurs, that sort of thing. And the article immediately felt, at least to me personally, out of touch with Mira's usually writing, because he's usually a very strong writer. He has a good grasp of like what topics are important, what sort of is in the zeitgeist. And the immediate impression I had, and I talked about this on Twitter, is you're essentially ragging on a player for things he made when he was an ESEA Open player at the age of 13 to 15. And that's where a lot of people took issue with it, was that I don't know what his ultimate goal was. He never said why he created journalism. I don't think journalists need to justify why they do something, why they report on something. But it almost felt like he was trying to implicate HexT and to a large extent EG in like bad hiring practices, even though it has no relation to HexT the adult and HexT the child are, so far apart and what's, what we expect. So that's kind of like the factual basis of like how people reacted. He creates a story about HexT using slurs. People immediately start, beating his ass in the replies over it. And that's kind of where we get into the drama side of things. So who wants to who would like to talk about the drama?
So after this post gets put out, more digging comes up on Lewis's side, and that's when things get ugly, when he had tweets of his own using slurs, and that's when things got very ugly, and he said, I will take down the article and I will bow out from social media for the time being. And he quickly kind of retracted his statement. Or not, I guess he didn't necessarily retract the statement. He took down the article, but I think the general consensus is the damage was already done, that the article's already put out. And overall, I think that, I don't know, man, it's really ugly to me that I think the agenda being pushed here is that HexT will get caught in the crossfire between a couple of people that really just want to target EG for some of their bad practices, which, look, I think that there are a lot of things that were stated that definitely don't feel like good business practices. I think a large one that's being run was just the processing for hiring a new coach, where they would go through a number of different interview processes, and they wouldn't actually end up hiring, and they would just lead the person on and then go with somebody else completely. Situations like that, for example, were a huge issue that was brought up particularly by Thorin. And he has a whole hour-long video that you can watch, which I appreciate the expose in that regard, in terms of how EG is running their CS department, and whether or not we have the right to kind of question what they're doing and what they're going to be doing in the next few years. But in regard to Hext himself, I it really sucks that he has to be the one that kind of has to bear brunt of all of this kind of drama, and it feels like, to me, I think that this guy should be trying to focus on his own game, and a lot of the in server things, because that's as bad as it is as of right now, and this is just going to make things worse for EG, I think, as a whole.
Which
I'm talking more the players, not the
yeah,
org.
which I mean, I want to expand on this too, because all of us here agree. This is like one of those things where it's like, yeah, it's bad that you tweeted those things, and he did put out a apology today about it on
Today,
Twitter,
yeah.
and it's like, yes, Hex should apologize for those tweets. You should take them down. And, most, probably do some sort of sensitivity training at some point, just to cover, whether it's EG wanting to cover their ass or whatever. But it begs the question, right? Like EG as an organization, why are you, one, not checking for these things in when you're going through and picking up prospective players and prospective talent? Because it's like you can go in a play at McDonald's and they'll check you. They'll check you for this kind of stuff. I mean, maybe not McDonald's, but like it doesn't have to be a big employer. Like a lot of them will do background checks and social media checks. That's like standard. And two, even if they found it, like it's not even a case of like, oh, we won't pick you up. Like this happened when you're 13 or whatever, right? 13 and I think a couple years later or something.
13 to 15.
15, right. And like it's like if you don't want to, you don't even have to not hire Hext if you find this stuff. It's just, have them delete it and say, make sure that you're not racist. And then, say, hey, because of this, let's do some sensitivity training or something. People grow, people change. But holy crap, this is just EG incompetence. And now I do agree, and I think this is like kind of our overarching point for this whole story, is that this is all very weird anti-EG agenda overall, in the way that I don't think we should be like picking out individual players to show the failings of the organization as a whole. And I think we all agree here that well, okay, Jeff, if you want to continue.
No, I mean, I'm sorry. If you have something like, I just have a lot to say about this topic, and I want to sort of touch on that like EG hiring decision and
Go for
more
it.
broadly the EG image.
Go
My
for
big
it.
issue with this is it almost feels like this is an extension of like culture war level topics into the esports scene, which I've never been a big fan of, in the sense that what I think the overarching agenda of this post and Thorin's video and the discourse on Twitter by those actors is that EG has set themselves up as a PC org, but one of their players on PC org said slurs. How can you be PC org if you have player who said slurs? And it's like, I could see it if Hex like said these things when he was an active player, but I almost feel like it's like a very cheap, callous attempt to like coax EG into a snafu where they have to overreact. And then, you can hop with your buddy Semler on the BTN episode and be like, ha ha ha, they hired Hex. I guess they are truly PC org, wink. And then like, or you can be like, ha ha ha, they didn't hire them. I guess they are not PC org, like wink. But it's like ultimately like it's very upsetting to me because I do feel like a lot of people were damaged and like almost whipped up into a frenzy over this. I don't think this is something Lewis would normally done if he wasn't caught up in the zeitgeist of the
Mhm.
anti-EG rhetoric, like we're saying, where there are things, and like you said, Ani, the EG expose Thorin did was very good. It touches on some real issues with how the organization operates, but it's like you're whipped into a frenzy into this whole like zeitgeist, and you're saying like anything I can use to damage EG as a brand, I'm gonna use it. I'm gonna throw it at them, and it feels wildly inappropriate and lacking in journalistic integrity from my point of view to do this sort of thing. Like if this story came across my desk, I might talk to the player about it. I might write it, but I would never write it into this context where I'm using it to completely damage the org, I would say this player has, some maybe moral failings, but I wouldn't say, oh, this shows that EG is morally corrupt. He did even mention in his own article they cut that I think Street Fighter player who said slurs when he was 26, which that's totally justified. You're an adult, grow up, get real. Um, but it's all just very, very weird, and it doesn't feel right. And I can tell that's sort of the opinion you get from the NA scene itself. A lot of people were very uncomfortable with the story, and I think it sort of touches on this issue where Mira, for his best intentions, and Thorin especially, they don't know a single thing about Hex. They've never talked to Hex at events. These guys don't go to events. You know, no one knew anything about him until he joined the EG team proper. No one has, an opinion on his personality. And they're just kind of, I don't, you don't have to do like a deep dive on someone and know them super personally if they say slurs or if they do something, morally reprehensible. But at the same time, this you both said it perfectly. The story isn't really about Hex. It's not about what he did. It's about what he did in the context of how can we use it to injure EG. And that doesn't sit right with me at all because he's ultimately, in my opinion, a good kid, and I don't think he deserves to, because what were they hoping would happen? Were they hoping that EG would fire him over this? Are you ruining, a kid's life so you can then make an episode of, of your show and say like, look at, we got him, mission accomplished, EG debated. Like, it's all just very sloppy. It's all very
Yeah.
sloppy and all very. And I think once Lewis realized sort of the knock on effects and how it was being perceived by the community, he did, delete the tweet and did take I believe the article's still up, but it's
Article
unlisted.
is down, I think. I just checked.
Article is down now? Okay, because yeah, earlier today it was still up. But it's powerful actors are trying to target other powerful actors in the NA space, and Hex is sort of a victim of that.
I also think to some degree it's evil geniuses is a very hot topic right now. It is probably if like if you're an advertiser, it's probably pushing pretty good CPM. It is very good for views right now, and I don't want to go ahead and just say this is all for views or whatever. It's very clear that there's people really have some strong feelings about EG as an org, from where they used to be to where they are now, and people are upset. And I think it's just a matter of, people are going too far in this pursuit of what we once had out of evil geniuses as an org, and also just kind of going too far far as just being critical. And I agree with you. I just think it's like a lack of due process and a lack of really understanding the consequences of your actions from a journalistic standpoint. So
Which is something Lewis is never, he's always been very careful and very
right,
professional in that
exactly.
regard.
Yeah.
I don't want to drop dime. I will, but try to keep leaks to the minimum in here. But it's like I'm hearing rumors coming across that this wasn't even potentially his article. It was maybe a pool article, like it was something that was assigned to him. But at the same time, he seemed to be a pretty big defender of it before, backtracking. So there's a lot of, there's a lot of uncertainty and and then Thorin himself said, he gave his information to Lewis. So it's like very, it's all very murky and it's all, it's all very like I will say, like, a big part of it is I think once people realize Thorin's involved, it's very easy to say, like, "We don't like Thorin, we don't like Semler,
Mm.
let's attack this has no merit on the basis of their involvement." Where, I'm a I don't wanna say, like, that generic thing, like, "I'm a big fan of Thorin," like, da 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 da, like, most people enjoy Thorin's content, that's kind of why he's a massive figure on Twitter, um, but, ultimately, like, I don't want this to be framed as like an anti-Thorin rant or an anti-Lewis rant. I just want to
Right.
say, like, I think this is ultimately a failure on most front, whipped up by, EG being such a hot topic of the day.
Yeah. Well,
Fair enough.
with that, I guess what we'll do is I think we wrap that up in a bow to kind of explain our thoughts on the situation. But we do have some more roster moves that we would like to kind of get into over the course of the next 16 minutes or so. And we'll start off with ATK, a now team going to ESL Pro League, and which will be in a relatively new format. But they have gone ahead, and it is a minus Fady plus Pluto. How are we feeling about this move?
So initially, I was just bummed that the roster move had to happen in the first place, because one thing that ATK has struggled with is trying to integrate a new player in DJ, and having to do that again with a more supportive element in Fady kind of worried me. But at the other hand, it also makes me really excited to see that we finally have like another player that's been around the ECL space for quite some time, trying to be called up to a top tier ECL team, and now we'll actually have the opportunity to play at EPL as well. So he'll have tier 1 experience now, which makes me excited. The question really becomes as to whether or not he can handle a very like structured system with Mistim. And and I know Shakespeare definitely has thoughts on Pluto as a player in that sense, but now it calls into question whether or not he can do that with Mistim. And I don't know, man. That is the one worrying thing. I think the upside for it could be very, very high, because again, as we spoke about in the last episode, I rate his mechanics pretty highly. It's just a question of whether or not he can be a team player and subscribe to what Mistim wants to output for this team, which is to actually compete at international tournaments.
I think a big part of this move is the Fady. The removal of Fady was had to have happened. You know, he had surgery on his hand. He
Right.
mentioned his tweet longer how he was just getting very homesick and he wasn't really enjoying being with the team in, I believe, Canada now. They've moved out of Mexico and they're sort of based in Canada temporarily. But it's like I think Pluto is a good addition to the team, knowing Fady had to go because it's not like they chose to remove Fady. I think if, for all
Right.
intents and purposes, they would have kept Fady. And I don't necessarily see anyone who could necessarily fill those shoes other than Pluto. Maybe someone like you could potentially say, oh, they should have kept MOTM, but I think that relationship was very damaged by his removal. When
Mhm.
he initially talked about it, he said, how it came out of the blue and he was very hurt by it. So you don't sort of want someone who's not wholeheartedly involved in the project to stay on.
Right.
um, so I do think, ultimately I'm excited for Pluto. I think he's one of the more experienced players you could have got on short notice who isn't tied down on a contract. So I'm sort of excited for him, but I don't know if I have high expectations for them at EPL ultimately though.
Yeah, no, I don't have high expectations going into EPL. I mean, it's tough when you start getting those North American teams coming out of Challenger League have a rough track record of running up into Pro League. This is a new format, but it is a less forgiving format. But Pluto being a player who has experience boot camping in EU, getting time. I mean, there is something to be said about how effective was that boot camping, considering Bad News Bears. They
Wasn't very good.
they
No.
had some issues. They had some issues performing, and I think some of that was mental. But uh, we'll see. I mean, I'd like to see ATK do well. I think that this team, I especially, I always want to see my boy Swisher do well, especially over in Europe. I've always been wanting to see, how does that guy get his break? Um, and I think that Pluto is probably, I mean, they very clearly look to their options if they're ending up on Pluto here, and I think that Pluto is going to be a good player for the situation given the constraints.
hmm I think the interesting thing too is I don't necessarily know if they could be the top 5 team in the RMR through to the major, but I do see them as a team that could do some damage if teams are caught unaware, especially those South American teams who I don't think they really have a good tradition of preparing for the NA squads. So it's like I like this roster. I just don't think it's ready to sort of crack through that the ECL glass ceiling.
It's rough. I mean, their Group D is really, really tough to get through. I mean, their first opening rounds against Ents, and then they'd potentially play the loser of Liquid or Rare Atom, should they uh, win or lose that game, depending. But Rare Atom is a potential BO3 win, but I think that's when it gets into that really like slugfesty type of CS, and I don't think ATK have the
Right.
mechanical
Uh,
skill to come out on top.
I feel
First,
like they're a team that's known more for their tactics than or like than having insane fraggers.
Right, exactly. And that just worries me. I mean, I think this team needs an entire season of ECL before I think they're even going to have an argument that they can start competing internationally. And it just feels like a lot of these roster moves came at an inopportune time. And it's just going to stunt their overall like potential at these events because I want them to, stay within these BO3s for as long as possible and just hang with them, stay within Europe for as long as possible, scrim as much as possible, and get as much out of the experience.
Now,
But
speaking
doesn't
about
feel that way.
roster moves at an inopportune time, let's move on to our next topic, which is,
Oof.
yeah, tell me about it. Is Nouns cut stamina? Cynic returns to IGL and op, and Marky is in back in on his first team in almost a year, more than a year rather. Thoughts?
I'm just really, I don't know, man. I want Nouns to succeed so badly just because they've always shown promise in a lot of ways. Obviously, I mean, there's a whole conversation about the players themselves and how they act, which probably has a hand in this roster move altogether. Because from what I was seeing outside looking in, the team looked like they had competition about them. They looked really good at conference, although they couldn't get it over the line against MIBR. The pieces were there. It looked like they had, the potential to qualify for EPL. And the fact that they've blown it up and they've abandoned the idea that stamina should be a key piece in this Nouns puzzle is really worrying to me. And that you now turn to Marky, which look, I will give Marky a ton of credit on what he did on Extra Salt. He was a huge proponent for their meteoric rise. I mean, I think in some ways you could even argue that he was wrongfully cut, that he still had room to grow on that team. And now that, but the problem is the narrative is now shifted because he hasn't played in, as you're saying, like in like practically a year, right? And that's just really, really worrying when you come into these ECL rosters where you have to hit the ground running almost immediately. Like the mechanics have to be up to snuff. You've got to be updated on the meta, and that always shifts very, very seamlessly across seasons. And Markey having to get thrown into the deep end is really worrying to me. And I think now I don't know where I feel about Nouns as a whole. I don't have any expectations for them overall.
Yeah, I mean, stamina. I mean, yeah, I mean, you're losing the brains of this operation for, I mean, we don't really know a reason yet, do we? Um, at least not that, not something that we
Publicly,
can
right?
publicly share, but
Like, publicly talk about,
I
yeah.
it's just like, yeah, Markey is great firepower for this team, but it's like how much firepower can you throw at a team before you understand that you need more strats than like, like here's our set execute on the A bomb side of Mirage or something.
Well, you could throw it back to that whole conversation, right? Of how poor their CT sides have been under Cynic,
This isn't gonna
and the
help at all.
expectation. Yeah, I know, I know, and the expectation was that you bring stamina in, he completely revamps your system, he provides a lot more structure to the team, and you kind of have a shaped up Nouns. And now the issue is you're back to square one, where you're going to have these philosophical issues on your CT sides, and you're not going to be able to take down top teams because you have like 10 round, 11 round T halves where you're just blowing people out of the server with raw aim. And showing that you have a decent foundation and absolutely collapsing when you don't understand the fundamentals of the
M-
game.
My
And you were
big
really looking to stamina for that person to kind of
mhm.
fix them.
My big take with this team is whether it's for just being unlucky for their hubris or for their personalities, Nouns has never been a team that's had a stable roster in their entire, 5-month history.
Very
If you have to
true.
remember, they did I think they did pretty good at the RMR for Rio. And what do they do when they get home? They immediately cut Jazz Pimp. They immediately cut Jazz Pimp. Then they lose George Starts to the EG project. Then they, decide, or pardon me, then they cut Sixty right after that because of, what sounds like personality issues, which, Danny and personality issues, like name a more iconic duo. And then they cut Stamina for, what seems to be, a mixture of performance and out of server reasons. And you put that all together and it's like they just keep changing their roster after every failure. And it's like that's not how you build a successful team long term. And that's not how you keep, the organization happy either. Like it's all very concerning for their future as two, we're entering a recession, we're entering the decline of NFTs and Bitcoin and all of that. And it's like this org is a Bitcoin org. And it's like I just think that their patience must be waning. as they've been very hands off with his roster and kind of seemingly let them do what they want. And I want them to succeed, but I need to like pump the brakes and just relax and like let their team grow naturally.
Yeah, and I mean, I don't remember where I heard this, but like to my understanding, they don't even do like contracts. Like these players aren't even like technically contracted; they're just like paying them. So
As far as I'm aware, that's like partially true. Like they have obviously like
yeah,
expectations, but they're not like written down. Like they have a lot of freedom and in nouns. And these players have a lot of freedom? I don't necessarily think so. I think they should have some kind of manager whose job it is to breathe down their neck and scrutinize every roster move and and be
Mhm.
like scrutinize every fight and be like, no, you guys need to make up. You need to kiss and make up. But
yeah,
we
you
don't
can't just
have
throw
a
money at the
ton of
problem.
time
Yeah,
left, so I do want to make sure we
yeah,
give
yeah.
time to our last two topics here for the day. What we have next is this actually just broke. Is PKL is stepping down from pain due to a mix of psychological and physical issues. I believe he'll be returning to Brazil. And then something what of a surprise is Nekes is returning to the roster, sort of as a stand-in in the interim. Paladin, I know you had something you wanted to say about this. I think you're pretty read up on pain. What's the scoop?
It's just I'm just so bummed that all that momentum has just been coming to a screeching halt. PKL, I mean, first of all, I think we should approach it from the Nekus angle. And when he was on this roster, he doesn't definitely wasn't a liability, but you could definitely see that Skulls was a ready upgrade over him. That the roster move made sense overall. But now bringing him back, it calls into question who's calling for this roster. Will it be Nekiz? Are we going to try to divvy up the calling duties? Because I think Payne was pretty set in their strategy and how they wanted to approach the game, and they found a way to kind of allow Zevi to do what he wished, and it allowed for Big Azera to be a very hard, strong entry. And overall, I think this team looked pretty decent, and now I think that they're going to really, really suffer heading into EPL. They looked very flat at Katowice, and I think this team is very momentum based. So when they don't have the wind in their sails, it's very, very worrying. And I don't think they're going to really have much to go off of in the interim. They'll have the CCT event that they can probably play through and potentially win. But other than that, I don't think there's much riding in their favor, which is just worrying because I really love this roster. I love the core that they've kind of sat through thick and thin. They've been through a lot of very high highs and very low lows. And I think their roster moves made sense on paper, but it just sucks that it's not actually coming together at the highest level of the game.
I think I
I think you
also, I think just I'm going to quickly touch on the CCT part. I mean, with about Payne potentially being able to take that. I mean, that playoff bracket is certainly something. So
Oh, we'll talk. I'm sure we'll get into it
yeah,
later.
that'll
But
be a
yeah,
next week
CCT
topic.
is always fun.
Yeah.
Fun. I think you summed it up perfectly. I don't think I have anything to really add about the move. I like Payne as a roster too, but they obviously haven't reached their potential. Now, with about 2 minutes left, this also broke today, but it's been kind of known about for a long time. Peacemaker has finally signed his contract with Los Plus One, incidentally, while he's working at IEM. So I guess I'll give my quick little thoughts on it first. I think this is a pretty mustard move from the organization. One, esports as a team has always struggled a lot with their vision, and I think with just having dependable results. Maluk's squad has always been an NA, and they've always been pretty good, but they always get blown. They pretty much frequently get blown out at any qualifiers, closed qualifiers, or an RMR or a minor, and it feels like they've been listless for a very long time. I believe in 2022 they cut through like 4 to 6 coaches, which is ridiculous when you think about it. So it seems like it's a team that's struggling to figure out their vision, and Peacemaker is going to bring a vision and a structure and a lot of experience to this team.
I really hope that he commits to this roster.
Yeah.
I think this could be a swan song in a lot of ways. I mean, we had that whole conversation of Peacemaker going from team to team, region to region. But this team has promise. This team has talent, and this team has shown that they can, you know, break through ECL before. They've done it before. Um, but now I think you're exactly right, Jeff. I think there needs to be that replication of form and potential at the highest level that this team can actually attend, and that's obviously the RMRs, and that is every little qualifying opportunity that they have. And so far at those key pressure-filled matches, they absolutely crumble, and they had struggled to find that fifth for so long. And I feel like now that Mobs is back, he looks so much more comfortable alpha of that 0-0 project, that I think this team can really perform with an experienced coach at the helm. So I think this is a match made in heaven. I have high expectations for Team One now. I hope that we can actually get another competitive Brazilian roster in that conversation at the RMRs. And I think that this could be definitely one that's cooking for a little while now, and it'll probably come to its emphatic conclusion at that Monterrey, Mexico RMR.
And theoretically, he's been working with them for a long time because
Right, the rumor was
months,
sourcing for
like a
while,
month
right?
ago,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. I certainly hope that Team One team can be turned around, because it kind of sucks to watch them, roll up the EPL, get blown out, roll up the random EU event, get blown out, and just show promise and just build slowly and slowly and slowly. But we'll see. And with that, we are out of time for this week. We will be recording not another episode. You only get 2 this week, but hey, bonus episode. So make sure to kind of check us out, socials, and you can find us on Spotify. You can find us on all of the various podcast platforms, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts. I make sure that it's everywhere. And yeah, so big thank you from all of us for watching and or listening. And we'll see you next week to talk about the Katowice groups and a few other interesting topics that we'll decide later. So with that, have a good week, and we will see you later.